All right, you've been watching live remarks from the White House, the very first press conference by U.S. President Donald Trump, and it's in the company of the British Prime Minister Theresa May. Trump saying a free and independent Britain is a blessing to the world. And Elisabeth Moutet, your reaction again? It is about form, because we know there isn't a lot of substance to be had from a very first meeting, as we said earlier. The chemistry you saw in that press conference, first of all.
I was looking at Theresa May thinking, how do I keep this act together? Because he was rambling at a great length on things that had nothing to do with what the press conference was supposed to be about, or the questions that had been asked. And you could see him giving her sidelong glances, because at the end of the day, he was quite aware that she had much more experience in that sort of thing than he did. And the rest of the time, we had the rehash of the campaign. But there was one thing which I thought was quite significant. Two things. One thing is that he read his prepared text, opening
his linear
text.
statement, yeah.
As far as and I haven't seen all of his presentations and meetings or whatever, rallies or whatever, but that is the first time that I see him actually reading something reasonable from actual prompter.
The new Donald Trump?
Well, it didn't last long. We saw that. It lasted a little bit, that. And then the other thing was about torture, when he said, General Mattis, who is the Secretary of Defense, has said that he doesn't believe, and Trump found it difficult to admit that somebody in what you might call torture or enhanced interrogation or possibly waterboarding, and he went on and on about it. But by and large, he said the general was hired because he's the expert, he's a general's general, and I will defer to him.
He will override because he's the expert.
He will override because he's the expert. And that's an interesting way of saying, I may be crazy, but I will trust the experts. So, stay with us. We're not that mad yet.
For a day or two, he'll trust them. I mean, I think the big question about the whole cabinet, I mean, he's brought some competent people in. The question is, how long can they work for this guy? If you have the President of the United States saying publicly, when you've barely taken office as Secretary of Defense, that he really disagrees with you on a critical question like torture, but he's the expert. Yeah, he's the expert today. Tomorrow, in a fit of pique, he could be gone. And I don't think that there is any limit on this guy. The other problem, the core problem with Trump, and this is something that someone like Theresa May must really have a difficulty grappling with, is that he believes in his own truth. He believes in his own facts, his alternate facts. We can joke about it. We can say this is so horrible. But no, he really believes that he has...
At this press conference, show me what you mean.
Well, at this press conference, he was trying to keep that in line. But every day, morning, noon, and night, we see that he's talking about this. Where did he talk about it? Torture, for instance. Yes, he's deferring to Mattis now, but he's talked to people who told him that torture is just fine, that it really works. He said that again and again and again. He said it yesterday in his interview with Hannity. So you're the Secretary of Defense, and he's on Hannity saying, I think torture really works. And people I've talked to say it really worked, because that's what I think, and that must be right. This is the problem with him. He doesn't have a reality-based administration, at least where the President of the United States himself is concerned, and where his immediate advisors are concerned, like Steve Bannon and Michael Flynn. They are people who are delusional and who essentially embrace a reality that they find politically expedient and emotionally satisfying.
I think I could agree with Chris there. What we saw at the start, yes, Donald Trump was reading this prepared statement, and he was almost wooden, because he's so unused to being put in that straitjacket of having prepared remarks to deliver. And the moment we went to quit, and you could see Theresa May is much more comfortable in that environment. She likes being controlled. She doesn't want to give much away. The moment it came to questions, Donald Trump's guard was down, and he could not deliver a cogent argument. He started off by saying, we're going to have many great relationships. Within a few seconds, he said, maybe we won't have as many. In fact, that will probably be the case. He literally could not hold it together for 5 seconds because he has no filter.
All right, Arthur, let me ask you about Theresa May, because she seemed to be establishing the goalpost here. She says we're 100%, we both agree we're 100% behind NATO, and she turns to him looks at him when she says that. And then when it came to sanctions on Russia, saying that sanctions should continue until the Minsk agreement is fully implemented.
Yeah, well, again, there we've seen that she tried very hard, and he didn't give an inch because he is sticking to his script, and his script is that he wishes, or he at least wishes to try in the first outing, to try and establish some rapport with Russia.
He didn't say he would lift the sanctions. He said, for now...
Exactly. He basically backed off, whereas Theresa May was firm. We're not lifting them because it's not been implemented.
Well, I think we're also leaving out a big element here, which is Daesh or ISIS or the so-called Islamic State. That's the real thing that pulls them together. Without Daesh, what would they have in common?
They have a common need. And I think looking at this, it's very obvious that each can help the other, and he looked a bit terrified of May, which was very interesting. I mean, he was...
Really, you think so?
I think she's definitely not a woman he will grab by the etc. I think he could see that she had more experience. He could feel that. And he was careful. He was very cagey about this. And it's helping because if she ends up looking to the European Union like the Trump whisperer, then she's got a few extra cards to play in Brussels.
That was the game Tony Blair played with George W. Bush, and we saw how that worked out. I mean, if she looks to the European Union, let's be real about this. What if she looks to the European Union like the Trump poodle, which is more likely, if she bends to him constantly, and she's likely to do that because Britain is in a very weak position.
Well, Ukraine is going to be... It doesn't matter what she wins on. If she manages to make him back down on NATO, even for a few months, it's a very interesting thing.
If anything, though, I think Theresa May did come out of that looking better than Donald Trump. So it's a win for her on that level.
Yes.
One more thing about this waterboarding issue, because we heard him saying that he will defer to his Secretary of Defense. Congressional Republicans who've backed most but not all of Trump's statements, his endorsement of a return to waterboarding, the notable exception. It didn't stop him, though, from sticking to his guns when he was interviewed late Thursday on Fox News.
I mean, torture is real torture, okay? Waterboarding is, I'm sure it's not pleasant, but waterboarding was just short of torture. I'm not into it. I will tell you, though, it works. And I just spoke to people who told me it worked, and that's what they do.
It works. I just spoke to people. That's exactly what I was quoting.
Yep.
I just spoke to people who told me it works. But now he says, but Mattis tells me, the defense secretary tells me, it doesn't work. So I'll defer to him because he's the expert. But what happens if tomorrow night or tomorrow he talks to some people who tell him it works again?
That's one thing. But when we talk about waterboarding, what he says is actually true. There are actors who've been waterboarded, and Christopher Hitchens, the journalist, has been waterboarded to say this is unbearable. But this is not what they do in Assad's prisons, for instance.
Maybe we should we go toward more of what Assad does? Is that the idea?
Answer. You want to score a point, but it's not interesting. The truth is, and I'm not saying I approve of waterboarding. I say that in this case, he is right.
Once you start, yes, but the problem is, what does he mean?
Advocating
Anne-Elizabeth, what does he mean when he says it works? It works for what? He thinks it works.
I think he's learnt it watching 24 on television.
Well, exactly. They waterboarded Khalid Sheikh Mohammed, the most talkative guy in the world, 100 and some times? You think they got more information out of him? No, that was vindictive torture. That's exactly what it was. Not carrying any water, as it were, for Khalid Sheikh Mohammed, who planned the World Trade Center bomb.
Carrying water.
The real reveal in these remarks, of course, it's like Chris says, it's very well, he's not been tested yet, Trump. The moment he gets a national security briefing every day, there's going to be one day at some point in his presidency where information is going to cross his desk from the Pentagon or the CIA where it says, listen, we've got this guy in custody, he's not talking. And there's going to become a debate. And at that point, the ego of Donald Trump is unlikely to defer to anyone. Because he just said there, despite saying that Mattis is the expert, he said, I know it works. So I don't see him holding back on that at all.
All right. There was one point in the press conference when we heard Theresa May talking about how they agree on they both want to be working for ordinary working people. So much has happened since Trump's first business day in office. Monday, his first meeting was with business executives. And then it's been overlooked by some with leaders of construction industry, trade unions, union leaders who cheered him when he talked about big infrastructure spending. There you see that meeting. dating back to Monday. And this is the big gamble, and perhaps, Christopher Dickey, where we may be underestimating Donald Trump. If he succeeds in coming through with those big infrastructure projects,
Well, God bless.
could he be a two-term president?
God bless. That would be great if he does it.
And Democrats saying they're ready to meet him halfway, coming up with
Sure,
a
which is what
plan.
let's just be clear, which is what the Republicans refused to do for 8 years when in fact Obama wanted these kinds of infrastructure programs. They blocked them at every turn. And why? They were too expensive. Now for
Except
some
for the
reason,
pipeline.
huh?
Except for the pipeline.
Yeah.
They wanted the pipeline.
So the pipeline, but that's not a big. When we're talking about American infrastructure, we're not talking about the pipeline.
American
we're talking about the roads.
infrastructure
We're talking about
is-
bridges. We're talking about a somewhere between $12 and $30 billion wall.
And-
that's all very good for the construction industry if it happens. Question is, will Congress support it? If Congress will support it, if they build not the wall, but if they rebuild America, that's great.
And if they do support it, is it the end of partisan politics as we know it? Because the Republican Party has been based on less government, lower taxes, less deficit.
Well, they're not going to raise tax and do it. So what do we know about Donald Trump? How many companies did he bankrupt? A lot.
Or?
How did he do it? He did it because he was going to build the damn thing no matter what. Well, he probably will bankrupt the United States, at least by Republican standards. I think that's a fairly predictable thing. At some point, they will just dial back.
There's nothing original in Congress, the White House, announcing that they wish to indulge in a massive state spending program. It's needed in the United States.
But the
Their
first to back
infrastructure.
him in this case are the Democrats, and he is a Republican president.
François,
But even if that was to happen, it's still more of the same trickle-down economics. Theresa May was talking about they want to help people who have lost out. We've had 16 years since 9/11 of the military-industrial complex. It hasn't really changed anything.
You know, what the Trump plan is a Juncker plan. Because in 2015, the European Union allocated for a first wave of infrastructure investment $355 billion. And there's a second wave coming up. So what happens is actually we have synchronicity between what's going on in terms of economics in Europe and in the United States. And this is why the stock market is so high. That's the only reason, is that right now, this is what's needed, and this is what's going to happen.
Some are calling it a sugar rush.
At the same time. The other thing is that the state, when you say the state of infrastructure is bad in America, it is terrifying. Why did Katrina flood New Orleans? Because the levees were not, there was no upkeep of the levees over at the Mississippi. You've got bridges in Minnesota that are crumbling down. So the state of infrastructure is actually much worse in America. We'll not talk about trains because we're Europeans, and frankly, it's not nice.
Let's talk about the highways.
It's not nice
Talk
to
about the
vote.
superhighways.
So they need all that. And they come just at the time when everybody's going to be doing it in the world. The Chinese are doing it as well.
But the difference
They're building that train from Beijing to
And Elizabeth,
Europe.
if you read the Republican platform on the issue of infrastructure, it's all supposed to be done with private-public
Yes.
Partnerships, which means that the private side has to figure out a way to make a profit on this. It's not like the European Union investing hundreds of billions of dollars or the French government
The
investing
EU
hundreds.
has got a great deal of public-private
Yes,
partnerships
but
because
the
they don't have
bottom
many
line,
left.
But the bottom line is that the EU, the Europeans, countries like France, they actually put the money into it.
There's no money in the French coffers.
Well,
It is exactly the same situation.
But also another thing that it's at the moment it's a panacea, this option. For example, when I lived in Washington D.C., almost the month I arrived, there was an earthquake and there was a crack in the Washington Monument. When I left Washington D.C., almost 3 years later, they were still fixing the crack in one monument. An infrastructure project does not get whipped up overnight. It takes decades to turn around infrastructure projects. It might look nice on a headline, but it will not land any big fish for Donald Trump that week.
Arthur Macmillan, question before we move on about the substance we've seen in terms of the relationship between this new president and the White House press corps. It's Friday. We have a round table of journalists here. The beginning, what we had on the first Saturday, the White House press secretary came out, basically chastised the reporters and then left, and then reverted to a normal press briefing on the Monday. How's it going to play out over the long run?
Well, I think the interview he did with ABC during the week offered an amazing insight.
Donald Trump.
Donald Trump's interview with ABC, because it all started off very cordial. And then the anchor asked him a question about the crowds at the inauguration. And as soon as Donald Trump was challenged on that, he got very prickly, and then he started criticizing the interviewer and his channel. The moment he was challenged and put on edge, he bit back, and that's how it's going to go. This is a man with an incredibly soft core when it comes to criticism. He is so insecure that he called up the director of the National Parks Organization to query his numbers from Inauguration Day. Don't you think the American president has better things to be doing with his time?
What does it mean all for freedom of the press? Does it not matter either way?
The press really needs to think about how it's going to cover this president.
Needs to think about it,
the rules have
because
gone.
I've seen articles saying, "Oh, freedom of the press is being rolled back." Is that true?
It's more the process of freedom of the press, because we've had a very cozy system of press briefings for years, and people sign up and they travel with the president. And sometimes it's produced results, but a lot of the time it hasn't produced results because it's controlled and it's very predictable. What I would urge certain media organizations to do right now is to seriously consider how they're allocating their ever-dwindling resources, because just going in and covering Donald Trump and being managed is not going to get anything out of this president.
But I think the issue is not just White House briefings. The issue is a frontal attack on the press.
But did you see during this press conference, I never saw correspondents being so belligerent against the president. They decided, let's go for broke. And that was going to be very interesting because...
Well, when you're not treated with respect, why should you return respect?
No, but again, the question is, I'm not taking sides on this one, although I thought it was great fun to have questions that were more lively. First of all, the Trump presidency is very good for the press because it will sell, papers, or it will bring clicks, because something happens every day. So that, in that respect, it's like a car crash. It brings in viewers or readers. So that's one thing. The other thing is that
good for the press, but some might say it's distraction. That this, the daily controversy is, like
it's not going to help
throwing
anyone.
chairs at a wrestling match.
No, and also people get tired of it.
Yeah,
it's like watching the same program over and over again.
No, but I trust people. Look, the best reporting I've read about the people who voted for Trump were for people who came from the other side but were interested in Trump voters. I have seen some fantastic long-form reporting. I've seen some good reporting on this. I think this is an exceptional situation, and frankly, as journalists, we should say thank you for an exceptional situation. It's about the only thing we can say thank you for, but we can say thank you for something. There will be many ways to skin that cat and to cover the Trump presidency.
You could say that's maybe that's the very unexpected silver lining. You could say that.
Yep.
However, at the same time, when the media has been challenged over its credibility, many wrong predictions on Brexit, many wrong predictions on Trump, it wasn't just the media's fault. However, you do have to realize sometimes there is a momentum in the press corps to get carried along, and that I do believe happened with Hillary Clinton. Yes. Donald Trump was not treated seriously until the very end, and the press were proved wrong. However, we have a chance now, very early in the Trump administration, to reconfigure or at least analyse how we cover it. And one way to cover it is not go to press briefings where we're told we're liars and we don't report facts, because that is
just not show up.
We have to seriously consider how we are going to deal with such an event, because, like Chris said, if you're not treated with respect, it eventually backfires on you and you will be treated very badly.
You're a journalist. I don't want respect as a journalist. I mean, go back to the time of Park Row. Really.
Don't lie to us.
Yes, exactly. But I think it's, this is not Hitler. He cannot throw journalists in jail. He cannot have people
Why do you think that?
hung on.
Why do you think that?
4 were charged after the inauguration.
So basically the press can still function.
4 were charged. 4 were charged after the inauguration. 4 journalists.
Were charged with what?
With rioting. So yes, he can throw them in jail, and he already has.
No, let's not. By and large, he cannot that much.
Well, by and large, Hitler couldn't do it either. By and large, at the beginning.
No, it is not the same situation. If we say it's the same situation, we are making a mockery of reality.
I would not. I'm not going to make a mockery.
We have the opportunity. It may not be easy, but don't tell me it's impossible to report in difficult circumstances.
I'm not, and I in fact agree with you, Anne Elizabeth.
I
agree with you, Anne Elizabeth, that the way to report on this administration is to see the extent to which the promises are kept, the extent to which jobs do come back, the extent to which. But here's the difficulty, is that a lot of the people who voted for him don't believe in facts. So when they don't get the jobs back, it's going to be somebody else's fault. They have a kind of a religious conviction where Donald Trump is concerned. He's their savior. He's their God, if you will. And they will blame anybody but him.
Have a
and
God,
he
and
will
it's not Trump.
he will make sure that they blame other people. That's going to be his game. So it's all going to be a complicated game. It's going to be difficult for journalists.
Good.
I agree. Let's go out and write about the people. And I agree, not so much about Trump. Let's reduce him to a Twitter feed.
And let's not, again, let's stop underestimating these people. You have people who have believed fake facts, but they are, these are responsible people who have been dealt for years a bad deal, and despising them is going to comfort them in the idea that Trump is right and journalists are wrong. I think journalists really have to self-examine on the way they've treated the voters of Trump.
All right.
I agree.
It's certainly not politics as usual here in France. Exactly 3 months before the first round of the presidential election, the ruling socialists are trying to muster a bit of enthusiasm, but if the election were held tomorrow, their candidate would be polling in the single digits, way back in 5th place. The other big mainstream formation is the center right, and well, it's got its own problems. The problem is called Penelope Gate, the British wife of frontrunner François Fillon, who as recently as last October told a regional newspaper, quote, "Up to now, I had never gotten involved in my husband's political life." Well, turns out she was on the former prime minister's payroll for 8 years, earning as much as 7,000 euros a month as his parliamentary assistant. French prosecutors now looking into why she was never seen haunting the halls of the National Assembly. As for Fillon, who ran as the integrity candidate in the primaries of the right, well, he's working on his defense line.
It was legal and completely transparent. She received a pay slip every month and declared her taxes. She was doing a job for me, a job that was crucial for my daily political work.
You buying that, Agnès Becmoutet?
I buy some of it. I buy some of it because Penelope Fillon is a conseiller municipal. She's an older woman of the
municipal council
of the town where they have a house in Sarthe, in the Loire area. So she probably was more involved. She was not completely disconnected from his life. And when he says, she helped me contact people in my constituency, she told me what was going on, etc., I pretty sure believe that she did that. I'm certainly, she hasn't been to the Assemblée Nationale because all the evidence concurs, and nobody has seen her, and so that's worrisome. I'm pretty sure that she has done work. The thing is that and the other thing is that we've got to tell foreign viewers that 1 out of 5 French MPs actually do the same thing. They hire their wife, sometimes their mistress, or their children to work, and some of the people they hire actually do work very hard, and some others, it's the same thing. It was legal. The thing is that legal is not enough. The nation, the public can't take it anymore. And that also,
by the way, it's illegal at the European Parliament.
It is illegal at the European Parliament. And guess who is not talking about this so much because she was nailed on this? That's Marine Le Pen. Normally you'd say, oh, Marine Le Pen is going to make fodder out of this. But she, for several years, had her partner as her parliamentary assistant. Now he's a Euro MP to Louis Alliot.
She also had her bodyguard on their payroll.
She had many people on the payroll. And she said, oh, but in France, I think she was let off the hook because she said, you can do this legally in France, and I wasn't aware that it's not legal in Brussels.
Well, she's had to pay some of the money back. So.
But of course they had to pay the money back. It's going to be interesting in Fillon. And probably
borrow that from Russia, though.
If Fillon paid back everything, saying it was legal, but I give everything back, it would be a grand gesture. We are talking about €500,000. This is not peanuts. And it's unbearable for people because usually an MP can have up to 5 parliamentary assistants, and they are paid, peanuts. They're not paid much. They're paid something like, $2,000 a month, if any. She had various amounts, but it was always the maximum that she could get away with. It's unbearable.
An article that's being quoted in the French press from your publication, the Daily Telegraph, dating back to 2007.
Just before I joined.
There's not word one about any political activity.
No. On the other hand, she's a British woman. She does it's drudge. Probably what she does is the normal drudgery that many MP wives do without being paid. She's a chauffeur. She's a hostess. She's a secretary. She's a computer fixer. She will do all sorts of things that actually do take time. She will, and at the same time, but the other wives do not get paid. So I think he's in trouble. The answer to this is he's in deep political trouble.
I think Anne Elizabeth is trying very hard to be balanced, but she knows, is better than anybody else. Deep trouble.
Deep trouble, and people are saying not so much the fact that he hired his wife, but that she earned more than 7,000 euros a month.
Nobody else in that kind of job earns that kind of money.
No, exactly. And the amount of money that she's earning, but also coming back to even the beginning of this conversation, he's the integrity candidate. He's the guy who was going to be Mr. Straight Arrow. And then look at it.
He is the guy who went to see a friend of his who was the chief of staff of the Hollande Élysée Palace to ask him to double up on the judicial inquiries in Sarkozy's judicial inquiries that gave no result whatsoever so far. So basically because he wanted to beat Sarkozy, who had been his president when he was prime minister and who did not treat him so well. So it's really a sort of, the bite of bit.
Arthur Macmillan, as the new guy in town, how are you finding French politics?
Well, it's very much the substance here, I think, is more the perception rather than the actual episode, because it's got deep similarities, parallels with the British MP scandal of a few years ago. And that had a catastrophic... Yes, the expenses scandal. That had a catastrophic effect on public confidence in elected politicians. And as Christopher says, this guy has stood up as the integrity candidate, and he is hit with this. And it's not even like yes, many people are paid for doing work that is no doubt got a parliamentary nature. But the point is that doesn't really count to the voters. If you weren't transparent and open, we don't trust you.
We don't trust you. Just again, it's been a special edition this week, what with that press conference. But just to give you a sample of some of the other stories we followed, Roman Polanski won't be hosting the French equivalent of the Oscars. Feminist groups outraged that the Polish-born director was picked to host the Césars. He's still dogged by statutory rape charges in the U.S. when he jumped bail in the 1970s. Gambia welcomed home its new president, who a week ago was inaugurated in neighboring Senegal, as his country's strongman of 22 years had tried to cling to power. West African troops have since forced out Yahya Jammeh without firing a shot. The Adama Barrow, a former real estate agent, is Gambia's first democratically elected president. And we couldn't say goodbye without saying Happy Year of the Rooster. In China and throughout the Far East, they're celebrating the Lunar Year. Those born in the Year of the Rooster are said to be healthy, sporty, self-assured, weaknesses, a little bit sensitive, stressed, and moody. Just to tell you, two of those born in the Year of the Rooster are Roger Federer and Serena Williams, who at 35 are in the final of the Australian Open. I want to thank Anne-Elisabeth Moutet, Christopher Dickey, Arthur Macmillan. Thank you for being with us here in The World This Week.